Good morning, everybody. We're just going to make a two-part presentation. I'm going to give some big picture observations from Australia. As Monica said, I feel as if I'm making a presentation from IPA land. There have been IPAs in Australia since 1996-97. Interestingly, when a Conservative government sold some state assets, our telecommunications company, and got extraordinary amounts of funding, some of which were devoted to Indigenous protected areas. And when I say some, I mean a sliver. So just a very quick big picture history, starting hopefully with just a 200 plus year history of what happened in Australia since 1788. At that time, of course, in 1788, the whole continent and the Torres Strait were Aboriginal occupied, Aboriginal owned, Aboriginal utilised. What the map shows basically is the extraordinary dispossession that occurred in Australia. Henry Reynolds, a historian, talks about the invasion of Australia and the dispossession of Indigenous peoples as the most extensive illegal land grab in world history. By 1965, there were no Aboriginal communally owned lands in Australia, but subsequently there's been extraordinary repossession. In the 1970s and 1980s, we had statutory land rights, which you can see in the third map, which shows that by 1993, about 12% of the continent was back in Indigenous land title. And then we had the Native Title Act after the Mabo High Court judgment, and by the end of 2016, but I can update that to 2018 at least, 46% of the continent is now being repossessed. So you had extraordinary dispossession and extraordinary repossession. Just four other snapshots about the state of the Australian continent today from Resource Atlas maps. I haven't put keys there, but I'm just really using these in a very illustrative way, where you've had intensive colonial occupation, extraction through industrial agriculture and mineral extraction. You've had extraordinary decline in environmental condition, be that in relation to vegetation, threatened species counts, riparian condition, the condition of the fresh waterways, and biophysical condition. Basically, the browns, and in the relation to the waterways, the pinks are really bad, and that's where most Australians live. And the areas that are green, or in the case of water, the blue, are the places that are in most environmentally intact. That doesn't mean they're threat-free, but they're relatively environmentally intact because they haven't been exploited like other parts of the continent. And just on the issue of fresh water that arose yesterday, it's noteworthy that in the Murray-Darling Basin, under a current drought that we've got in Australia, Indigenous people who've got native title rights to water are actually buying bottled water because their waterways don't produce potable water. So that's how bad things have got in terms of the environmental condition of Indigenous lands and waterways in the southeast of the continent. I showed this map yesterday where we have remote living Indigenous people and different types of land title. The important thing to recognise here is of the total Indigenous population of 800,000, these discrete communities represent about 20%. There's about 160,000 Indigenous people who live on Indigenous titled lands. And this map doesn't very clearly show it, but there is a number of registered claims that will show land title increasing to about 70% of the continent. But the sorts of titles that people are getting are these non-exclusive forms of possession. And what that really means is that these are lands that are still in productive use, particularly for pastoral cattle ranching. It's only the non-exclusive possession and land rights lands that are actually, available for to be turned into protected areas. And that's precisely what's happened in Australia. We've seen Indigenous title lands increasingly turned into protected areas, to the extent that today we have 75 Indigenous protected areas. As we heard yesterday from John Scott, they account for for approaching half of the Australian conservation estate and approaching 10% of the Australian continent. So these are massive areas that Indigenous people now manage for conservation. This is the official government map, which shows those 75 Indigenous protected areas in red. There is growing demand for Indigenous protected areas, in part because when people get back their land, not only do they want to rehabilitate it, but they live in remote places where there are very few employment and other opportunities, and conservation is one of the most desired and welcomed form of employment for people. There is a funding that goes with Indigenous protected areas. In a Canadian context, that funding might sound like a lot. It's about $20 million per annum for protected areas, and on top of that, there's about $80 million for a ranger program. And this is the Commonwealth-funded Indigenous ranger groups. There's a program called Working on Country. This all sounds like a lot of money, but in fact what it does is generate, there's money there for about 880 full-time positions for rangers to manage about 1 million square kilometres. So it doesn't actually spread very far. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. And just to change the scale a little bit and segue into Dean's presentation, and changing hats a little bit here, Dean and I are directors of a company called the Garagat-Gundji Trust, and we are actually helping to support our 3 protected areas, 2 of which are declared Indigenous protected areas. Jelk, which covers 6,700 square kilometres, Wardekken, which covers 14,000 square kilometres, and Mimal, which covers 20,000 square kilometres, all in the very north, the tropical savanna of Australia, the area that's been, if you like, last colonised. The environment is most intact, but again, I emphasise, certainly not threat-free. So just to end, some of the challenges that we see coming from the Australian context, the funding, and again, it's touted by the Australian government politically as being enormous, $100 million per annum, but that funding is not based on any environmental or cultural needs analysis of what's needed to, in fact, restore the environmental and cultural values of the land. There's no mention of environmental degradation. There's no mention of the need for environmental and social justice for Indigenous people. The argument's all couched in terms of public benefit, and this is really to placate the majority non-Indigenous population. But nevertheless, we do see some extraordinary initiatives, and one of the things that you'll see from Dean's presentation, but I think he'd agree with me, that in some ways the IPAs we work with are the most fortunate. In Australian, we refer to them as the top drawer IPAs, because not only do they get funding from the IPA program and the Working on Country program, they also get funding from, and I've got one map here, and Dean mentioned this and he'll say more, from carbon farming. So they do in fact sell carbon credits and get paid for that. And they also have Garagat-Gundji to support them. So, just to run IPAs in the north of Australia, to a modicum of good environmental management practice, to ensure that biodiversity is conserved, that the cultural landscape is maintained, requires funding from a variety of sources. And Garagat-Gundji itself, the trust, is at present required to raise somewhere in the region of $2 million per annum just to provide some of the basic services that Indigenous people require to live on their country, to provide environmental services for the national benefit, for global benefit, but also, of course, for their own benefit. And this is an extraordinary challenge. At once, it's terrific that we're able to raise this sort of money, but it does require us, people like Dean and myself, to regularly go cap in hand to rich Australians of high net worth, and look to raise money for the provision of services like schooling, like the provision of shopping facilities, like the provision of community-based biodiversity monitoring, like the provision of rock art monitoring that really should be funded by the state. So we're in fact offsetting through our activity the sorts of services that the state should provide. And I say we're top drawer because these three protected areas are probably the best funded in Australia, and many of the other IPAs are looking to, in fact, get the sort of support that we're managing to deliver. But, again, this is a crowded and competitive area, and, we're all trying to raise money from just a small number of high wealth Australian individuals, and we certainly, when we take money, it has to be on a hands-free, independent, no strings attached basis to look after the biodiversity of the Wardekken, Jelk and Mimal protected areas. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Dean.
Thank you, John. How is everyone this morning? Right. Thank you. Look, I'm going to talk, got three companies to talk, to give these presentations within the IPA area. The Alpha is it's a fire abatement program, which we set it up about 4 or 5 years ago. That's the main projects and industry we set up for our people, for our livelihood. And when we make this money, it all goes back for employment and services and buying equipment for our rangers. Wardekken Land Management is a not-profit company, same as the Alpha. To able to set this land management by bringing people back on the landscape and managing. Alpha is an industry that supports our fire programs, support our people as well, carrying out the similar thing as fire, but also turning into a business for our people within Northern Australia. Gargajanji Trust. Oops. Kargatganji Trust it's set up by our own from Wardekken people. It's meant to set this trust, to look for endowment to build that for our families and people for generation and beyond that. Wardekken, in 28, the Binin Gunwalk clans of Western Ireland came together to found the Wardekken Land Management Limited based on the Globalisation outstations community. Wardekken is an indigenous-owned and direct company that is bringing people back on the traditional land to manage the country for conservation and preserve and revitalize their traditional culture and knowledges. That's how strong the people really believed that they want to do something better. Because for a decade, we tried to find a secure funding to set our programs, but a lot of the government initiative programs has been set in these regions has failed a lot. But when the land management became initiated, then that was our opportunity to get our hands on and gave our thoughts a bit further, going out and setting up such a program that gave us more power in our own rights to set something like this. As you can see on the map, where our protected area, it's in a central armland of a plateau. I'm sorry there's two other IPA regions not there, but this is just only for a Wardekken area. When we're talking about the protection area, what we are protecting is something is belong to us and something has been left there for many years because our people have moved out and the land has become unmanaged. When we're protecting our land, we see the environment is part of us. We believe every trees and animals, they are our totems. And we see them and we use them as our metaphor. They are our family trees. And we protect them the way that it's been protected for thousands of years by our ancestors. Now, our Wardekken area contains 1.4 million hectares indigenous-owned land on a Wardekken area under the IUCN Category 6 protection area. The white wallaroo is supposed to be a black kangaroo, but it's been painted by our senior elder, ORU. He's a member of Order of Australia. The old fella who had visionary, who brought back people back on the landscape because he was very, very concerned. When he was a young, he's seen many tribes and many neighboring groups lived in this particular area, at the IPA area. But now they're all gone. They're all living in a different places. The land became empty. And people out in that other communities, they became a diasporas, people of no land. So this is why this project has been initiated for trying to get people who originally belong to this within that indigenous area, protected area, bring them back, bring the children back on the landscape, and once again, and sit and work together. Inside, as you can see, That's the management programs that we work and look after. Being in knowledge. Being in knowledge. Our knowledge needs to bring that knowledge back so we can start teaching our children. Community livelihood. People need to enjoy a life in the bush and remain healthy and remaining in the land that their grandfathers lived. We have manual bushfires that create a carbon for our people and create jobs for our people as well. We also have my projects, small mammal projects. Rock art, we teach our children. There's a storytelling where we want our children to ever have this rock art storytelling in the future of their children as well. We have food. Looking for, we need to teach our children bush food. Also, the protection of our sacred sites within that area. There's a heaps of sacred sites, but we need to get back and get more information from Land Council to show us, because this, over the years before this project has began, there was a Land Council documenting with all people, all the sacred sites within the Wardekken areas. So this time around, we're asking Land Council to give us a hand, or to bring, to help us to set a, to go and look for these sacred areas. Feral weeds got into our country, where we're doing a lot of weed works. These weeds aren't from here. They are feral to us. So we do eradicate those weeds, such as cambergrass and mimosa. Cambergrass is a cattle feed that has been used by cattle. And now those cambergrass are around in animal land, and we try to keep our eyes out to see if one of those cambergrass growing in nearby. Because the cambergrass, it's produced really hot fires during the dry season when it burns. Therefore, when it burns really hot, it probably kills all the little animals and insects that originally belong to that area and need to be looked after. So cambergrass is one of the grass we're trying to look out for. Out in a floodplain, mimosa, pigra, that's not a problem, and that's soaked up in all the billabongs around in a lowland area. Water buffaloes. Water buffaloes does a really great damage to our land, out in a lowland area, out in the billabongs, and also up in the Scarpan within the Wardekken area, because there's a lot of sacred species. There's a freshwater sacred freshwaters out there, and also our drinking water, and our springs always get damaged by buffalo. A lot of these buffaloes are being culled every year. And we're trying to lower this number down. We don't want to try to eradicate them all, but at least we just lowering the numbers. The meat, we enjoy meat for our family groups. Each animals are being culled within the traditional owners areas. We give this animal meat back to the TOs out in the communities and with our closest homeland that we have. Unmanaged fires, it's very devastated. When people were there, the fire was really hot. and unknown to us, that country has been burning for over the decade when people moved out. When we got back to our landscape, we started to do something about it. This has been happening over the decade when people moved out. When we started to move back on the landscape, the WALFA, West Arnhem Fire Abatement, started to begin. Reinstating a fire manager, going back, using a traditional fireworks, managing over the Arnhem Plateaus. Very successful environmental, social, cultural, economic benefit. That's, the benefit comes back to us, and we share that benefit and put a lot of the money in for our work program. And each time our other family groups comes in, at least we provide them with jobs. Alpha is being set up because of a new groups came in, such as people further down on the eastern side. The area is being set up where lots of community rangers want to be participating, similar to our Wardekken area. There's a Mimal, as you heard. There's a Warfera swamps. There's a northeast Arnhem and southeast Arnhem land. They're all active in doing the same thing. They all fit into this Alpha partners. And we are doing the same thing, abating fires, because the fire is one of the good things, and also brings back a good amount of dollars, and to able to continue instead of waiting for a government subsidies to come in. But we do get a lot of funding from the government. But sometimes a lot of people are all going into the same bucket. So you sometimes be unsure whether we are lucky or not. So in this way, we make our profit out of our own pocket, and we put our money into that sort of employment. There's nine or eight partner groups within the Alpha. There's Jawon, that's on the lowland. There's Rangers out here. Mimal, that's within the Wardekken area. Jalk, that's in the middle. That's Wardekken in the middle. Jalk's up there. And Ajumal Ranges. Then we have a Esrak at Ramangini. Then there's East Arnhem groups, and that is South Arnhem area. We all participate at the same. There's a burnings be happening in the next month or so. Before our burning begins, we all get together and have a workshop. But first fire, pre-season fire, starting off this year. In the early dry season burning, on-ground burning, early dry season burning, it's on ground. There's a lot of works on ground is happening, and the other time there's an aerial burning. And during the burning, when on-ground burning, when the boys are out on ground, they come across with all this painting, rock art paintings. They are significant to our country. They are significant painting for our children' future as well. So we must protect those storytelling objects when we come across, and we record them, and we GPS point them, and making sure that we record them, and next round and other other team, the researchers will come and do monitoring these areas. As I said, aerial burning, we give our elders opportunity and rangers together to go out. The elders mark the areas where they want to burn, and the young rangers will just drop the injuries on the ground as why they travel. It's a, it's a real good thing that bringing our elders on the chopper and working with them along, they tell stories along as well to our young rangers. When we have human occupations back on the land, this is what we can see. Before, there was a lot of red. There's been a lot of hot fires. And the legend shows, some of these fires around it, before in this part of the IPA area, there was all red. It's shown on our map. It shows how frequent late dry burning. And on late dry frequent burning, as you can see, there's a lot of red, a couple of reds up here. From early season to late season burning. And you can, it tells the difference from the previous years, what's been happening. And this is early burning. We can see there's no red, no burning around here because people are very active doing fireworks in this Wardekken area. And also in this Mimal region plus the south and east Arnhem. Every year, we get we sell our carbon out of the carbon money. Each group from Wolfa, Kalfa, Silfa, Silfa 2, and Nilfa. Each from year 2011. This year was 2017 was a good year for all of us. In Wolfa area was very good. There was 400,000 carbon and 35,000 Kalfa. As you can see, those legends. And out of that, Australian dollars like $13 per a credit we sell to our industries. Ganji Trust has been explained before. The trust also help to help fund the money to set indigenous protected area. At the moment, there's 3. There's a couple of more. They under the way of consulting with Land Council to have the protected area in their area as well. And thank you. I'm sorry I've been fast because of the time limit.